Hi. How is everybody? Good, good, good. I am so glad you're all here. My name is Leah Fabel. I'm the Metro editor here at the MinnPost. Super excited to welcome you to the Cityscape live chat with MinnPost columnist Bill Lindeke. Now that the doors are closed, I can say this is my favorite part of the paper. I love Cityscape so much. There are some seats open up front, and this is wonderful that this is a nice, I was actually hoping that we would have a crowd that wasn't too enormously overpacked, because this means that we can actually have the conversation that we're hoping to have. So please move on up. We're very excited that you're all here. Come on up and let's get cozy here. Before we turn to Bill, I want to thank all of our MinnPost Festival sponsors and supporters. I also want to thank MinnPost members. Remind you, non-members, to donate via the QR code on your name tag to get that tote bag. I think you've probably been reminded enough times by now that hopefully you've all done it by now. But I'm here to say it again. This is going to be an informal chat, and we're going to be turning to you all for questions, so be ready for that. We don't have question cards. I'm going to be coming around with the mic. It'll be fun. But before we get to that, I want to briefly introduce Bill, who has been the Cityscape columnist at MinnPost since 2014. He is a lecturer in urban studies at the University of Minnesota Geography Department. I'm a proud urban studies major. And he has written multiple books on local urban history. My favorite is St. Paul, an urban biography, but I am biased as somebody who lives in St. Paul and has very deep roots in St. Paul. And we kind of were wondering before this, can we get a show of hands, who else here came from St. Paul? Okay, good. Happy to see it represented. I'm gonna kick us off. So we have elections coming up in St. Paul and Minneapolis. We are all looking at these big issues. I know housing, public safety, the future of our downtowns, the future of our main economic arteries. Bill, I know you're watching those issues very closely too. But what else are you watching for in these elections that might not be on the average voter's radar, but that's still of very vital importance to the future of our cities?
Thanks. Thanks for everyone for coming here. I'm really flattered that so many of you chose to come here to this room, so thanks a lot. And for reading the column, I assume that's what you're reading. It's really fun to be here. So the city elections that are going on right now, pretty interesting if you live in Minneapolis and St. Paul. The question was, like, what's really at stake? And it's kind of tricky because often for city politics, there's a lot of consensus around many issues, the things that would normally be very divisive at state or national level. At the city, we can all agree that we want to grow the economy and we want keep things safe, safe public safety, and there's a lot of consensus about lots of things. But so, what's really at stake with who gets elected? I think that's a little bit of a narrower slice. In Minneapolis, we'll start there because basically St. Paul is a little murky, as it usually is. But the Minneapolis, it's very clearly, Nicollet Mall is one of the things that who gets elected mayor will change that street. So incumbent Mayor Fry is on board with taking buses off of Nicollet Mall and turning it into some sort of public space that is a little vague, but you get a sense of what it will look like based on a few changes recently in events that have happened. And then if it's a different, one of the other challengers to get elected, then you'd see Nicollet Mall probably keep the buses on there. So that's on the ballot in a way, right?
What would Bill Lindeke do with the buses?
We'll get to that later. I think that's an interesting question that we can maybe talk about. But I want to give you this list of things that I think your vote will change or affect. Another one would be bus lanes. There was a big small controversy. I wrote a whole article about this when it came out about Hennepin Avenue, and there's sort of an interesting field study going on in Minneapolis, or will start going on starting in about a month, where we'll see how temporary bus-only lanes versus 24-hour bus-only lanes, and then an in-between option how they work in real life with enforcement and drivers and the chaos of traffic, on the streets of the city. Because Mayor Fry and his staff, who are in charge of Public Works now, vetoed the 24-hour bus lane option for Hennepin Avenue to put only bus lanes in place for rush hour. So basically just 4 hours a day, I think, was the final situation. And that's going to open up soon, and we'll see whether that was a good or bad idea. But I can't wait to find out, actually. I sort of think it'll be bad, but that's the kind of thing, those small policies, there's some other, minor, street decisions. I think rent control is the one that's sort of on the ballot in Minneapolis, where if it's a challenger gets elected, and then you have maybe a more kind of left council that will push rent control or rent stabilization through. And then if Mayor Fry is reelected, that won't happen. So, I don't know. That's a very detailed question. Let's see. Homelessness policy, there's this differences of opinion about what to do about encampments. That's a very difficult problem to solve, but the kind of the left voices on the council and then the center Fry coalition have different answers that are pretty starkly oppositional about that. And then there's sort of this vague thing about should cities be running more consensus, or should it be a divisive kind of administration? And that's one thing that both Minneapolis and St. Paul, I think, have in common, where the mayor and the challengers are pledging to work better with the council or kind of go their own way and tell the council, what to do. And then in St. Paul, it's really hard to find an issue where it's clear one side is against it and one side is for it. The closest you're going to get is maybe the Summit Avenue bike lane plan, which Mayor Carter is a big fan of, and the challenger, I think, is more skeptical about. So I'm talking about Cowley Herr, who's I'd say the most high-profile challenger that he has. That's my list anyway, Leah.
No, that's perfect. And those, I like some of the ones that you point out that we're not always thinking of. We hear the big topics all the time, but oftentimes I think city elections are decided by these small issues that really turn out people to vote, or things happen that we don't know are going to happen because we've only been paying attention to the big issues. So
yeah, and everyone agrees about gun control. Everyone wants to fight the Trump administration and wants to grow the economy and grow housing supply, and there's a lot of consensus that doesn't really get focused on, and that's fine.
That's where we're at. So I'm guessing there are plenty of issues, maybe some of the ones that we just talked about, that you all want to ask Bill about. So I'm going to turn it over to the crowd. In the interest of time, please keep your commentary brief. I know sometimes it helps, but keep it as brief as you can and keep your questions nice and succinct and to the point. So I'm going to walk around with the...
We might want to switch mics here,
yeah. So who's got a question to kick us off? I see the bright pink.
Thank you. Elephant in the room, I want to be able to go back to Minneapolis. What's going on with getting people to go back to the city? Because it's too scary.
Also,
It's because of the crime issues.
Thank you. Yes.
well, crime is a tough issue to talk about because, an anecdote goes a long way, right? But if you look at data, crime has gone up and down over the years. 1990s, I've heard, were a pretty high crime period for Minneapolis and St. Paul and around the country, and then it went down kind of strikingly in the last maybe 15 years, and then it rose again following COVID. This year is actually pretty good as far as homicides go and violent crimes. But, statistics aren't really going to convince anybody. What you really are talking about is, I saw something the other day when I was on the train or out the window of my car that was shocking, or I heard a story about that kind of thing is really hard to combat because the media and our political situation nationally and at the state level feeds off of this kind of concern. And I don't know. I could tell you my personal observations about my neighborhood in the last few years is I've heard far fewer gunshots in Frogtown than I did in 2020 and 2021. And that bothered me, and it still does. But yeah, things are getting better, I'd say. There's things that aren't getting better too. So we could talk about homelessness and encampments and drug use in public spaces.
We should talk about those things.
Those are all hard challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so it really depends on specifically what you're talking about. There's also this question of downtowns, which the real answer to crime, I think, is eyes on the streets, which is what Jane Jacobs said in 1960, which if you look, I did this story a little while ago about the future of Uptown, because there's, it was a lot of vacancies at the corner of Lake and Hennepin. It used to be a thriving retail destination. I remember the Apple store when it replaced the Uptown Diner, and it was the end of the world, And now people are sad the Uptown store closed, the Apple store closed, when the Victoria's Secret is empty, and everyone hated the Victoria's Secret when it opened. But that's, right now if you go to that corner, it's a lot of vacant spaces. And so if you look more closely at the vacant spaces, there's someone under the doorway hanging out. And that's because the building's empty, So there's sort of a vicious cycle that happens where vacancy and the lack of people create opportunities for folks to loiter and do drugs, and other things might happen. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's not an easy answer to your question, I'm afraid.
Are there examples of cities, are there shining examples of cities that have brought their crime down to the levels that people have moved back in, and they have become, the cities that get up and speak at conferences about how well they've done at that? And, what were the strategies?
I haven't dug deep into statistics. I see stories once in a while about crime going down, and I saw, I've been tracking homicides in St. Paul, because that's where I live. And homicides are pretty bad, we can all agree. But they're actually, what month is it? So there's 9 this year, which is at a 5-year low or 20-year low. It was something shocking, and I was like, wow. But complaints on the Green Line in St. Paul are still rampant. And if you go downtown and you hang out and you look at Central Station, it looks bad. So I think it's really a nuanced situation, and I don't know what to tell you. I think as businesses reopen and we start to recover from the really disruptive pandemic in our downtowns and in other key corridors, you're going to see that vicious cycle start to dissipate, and the opposite start happening, where businesses open, more people are around, there's less unwanted behavior and less crime. Yeah, that's a long answer.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for that long answer. And could you give us more? So you said it's a question of time before things stabilize, but time by itself isn't the thing, right? So my question is, how can Minneapolis deal with increasing demand for investment in what we're talking about? Public safety, the first question, housing, et cetera, while the shrunken tax base, especially downtown, restricts resources available to do it. So how's the city going to balance the fact that there's this demand for investment, the liberal faction running in this next election saying we need more, including we need to reduce property taxes, yet the commercial base in the downtown has evaporated?
That's a good one.
Well, so this question of the future of downtown is something I think about a ton, because it is really important to the tax base, what you're exactly precisely talking about. So probably all of you know this, but I was a little stunned when I first learned years ago that commercial and industrial property are taxed at twice the rate of residential property, right? Which means a store, like a balloon shop or a skyscraper, is a 2-for-1 ratio versus a house or an apartment building or a residential skyscraper in downtown or in any part of Minneapolis or St. Paul. And so we really do depend on businesses and the downtown buildings to pay for services throughout the whole city, no matter where you are, right? But the downtown is kind of a separate problem, you know. It has a lot to do with work from home and the changing economy. And, you know, I know, like, the anecdote in my head about this is Target workers. When Target's obviously the most important company in Minneapolis, and they're right downtown and actually across the street, right? So, but they have all their workers come in from the whole region once per quarter, I believe. And it's a huge deal for the businesses downtown, and you see all these people, and the streets are full. But that's only 4 times a year. I don't know what the work from home policy is at Target right now. I think
They just brought them all back.
all back,
So,
but to
a
what
couple weeks ago.
extent though? Not 5 days.
Is it 3? I was going to say 3 or
Yeah.
4. Yeah, 3 days.
3. So 3 days is still half of, because, you know, people round up. I don't know if you know this, but when you work, you kind of fudge that a little bit. But so that's still half of what it used to be, and that's that 100,000 people or something. That's a lot of the density of downtown Minneapolis that's just gone, and will be forever probably. Like, that's not going to change, I don't think. We'll see. I'm sort of thinking that that's going to be a lingering just outcome of the pandemic, is that people are only going to go to work half the time. And that's probably fine, you know? But it does mean we have to really rethink downtowns. Yeah.
So far, we don't know what to do about crime. We don't know what to do about downtown. You're actually, okay, I see you in the back. I'm going to give it to you, and then we still have lots of time.
So my question here is kind of related to everything we've talked about. You know, kind of in a lot of people's minds when they think about having a family or having kids, they think of the suburbs. I know living in the city that there's a lot of things about living in the city, especially around transportation and street safety, that I wouldn't necessarily, you know, be interested in having young kids in the street, you know. So what are we doing about, you know, families in Minneapolis and growing our population and getting people to call Minneapolis and St. Paul home and not just fleeing to the suburbs?
This is a perfect question for me because I have a 4.5-year-old daughter who just learned how to ride a bike this week. So I'm so proud of her, by the way. We learned in the alley, you know. And then my brother in Boston, he lives in the suburbs. And so I teach a class on suburbia at the University of Minnesota. And I often will talk about the contrast between his family and my family and what kind of lifestyle choices you have on the everyday basis, because he's in a very suburban context. And I've got my alley, and he's got a big yard, right? So I can walk to the corner store with my daughter. She always wants to go. Like, she's like, let's go get a popsicle. And it was like, okay, and we do. Or we can walk to the train, and we go to the library. And and my brother has to drive everywhere except to the church, which is right down the street, or to the like the forest. Like, he can literally walk down his block and go into a woods that has a bike path that goes to a pond, and it's very beautiful. But these are just differences in how my kid and my nieces are going to be raised and the kinds of connections they're going to have. I think we have great assets for families in Minneapolis and St. Paul in our parks. So I could give you right now a top 10 playgrounds of St. Paul list that I've been carefully studying for the last 2 years. She just started going to a pre-K school that's about a mile from my house, and I can bike to it. So I think there's a lot of, maybe unacknowledged strengths to raising kids in a city, and suburbs are nice too, but I don't think it's as stark as maybe it once was about where you have your family.
Great. Well, I live across the street above Sushi Train and have loved it for 8 years and would encourage anybody.
The best transit system in Minneapolis.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We need more people, so consider moving. But what role does government play in getting businesses into first floor commercial units? We have a lot of empty ones. Or have we reached a point in city's history where the goal of having active first floors is just not reasonable?
So this is a great question because you're like literally looking at my list of future Cityscape topics right now. I've got a long list over the years that I've generated, and one of them is first floor retail, what to do about it. Maybe this comes back to your question too, is like, Hennepin Avenue or Lyndale Avenue or whatever avenue, how do you fill those spaces with businesses again? And it's not easy. We for a while outlawed first floor retail in a residential building. From the 60s until about 2005, it was just not allowed in the whole city, and now we've tried to encourage it, and maybe even a little too much. So that same story about Uptown, for example, there's a development that got approved at the old CB2 furniture store at 31st and Hennepin, and it's not going to have any retail on the ground floor, which I was a little miffed about, so I wrote a column about that. But can we still afford to have retail everywhere? Or are those regulations that ask and demand for mixed-use buildings overreaching because there's no demand for them anymore? I think, honestly, I was thinking about Portland about 6 months ago because I went to Portland, Oregon for the spring break this year in March. And Portland, Oregon, if you've never been, it's got thriving small businesses that you just can't conceive of how they would stay in business. Like there's a artisanal yarn shop, except the only color available is orange. And you go in there and it's like, there's the shopkeeper, and somehow that's a business that pays their property taxes. And I don't understand how. There was a brewery where it's all just role-playing game breweries, And I would think, okay, there's an audience for that. And then I hung out there, and the people playing the role-playing games don't drink beer. So I don't understand how they make money. And I looked into it, and turns out that Southeast Portland in particular has like lower commercial property tax rates for small businesses than the rest of Portland, thanks to some weird legislative quirk that goes back 25 years. So one of my ideas, and I'm gonna write about this maybe in the next 6 months or something, is should we rethink at a state level commercial property tax rates for small businesses to try to get those storefronts thriving again? I think that would be good. And but I haven't heard anyone talk about it, so I'm really proud of my idea, But you're all welcome to steal it, and I think it's an interesting question that there's other things to do too as well. So loosening up regulations. This is where the partisanship gets kind of interesting, but the stories I've heard about St. Paul's Department of Safety and Inspections are just endless, and people hate them, okay? And, you can see why an inspector is never gonna be popular, but even business people that I've talked to over the years that are very, responsible and try really hard to do the right thing will just tell me these horror stories about how DSI works in real life. And I think that the city of St. Paul should be doing a lot more to help the businesses get through the process of getting a permit to build their patio or to rehab a building or whatever it is.
Hi, thanks, Bill. I'm John. I grew up in the Riverside neighborhood, in Riverside Plaza, and now call Shoreview my home, and I serve on the Shoreview City Council, and wanted to know what are some ideas for suburbs to be part of the solution for sustainability and livable communities.
Oh, John, I want to really thank you for the amazing playground in Shoreview.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I was saying the top 10 St. Paul playgrounds that I've taken Ruthie to, but that one in Shoreview blew me away. It was even better than the one down in West Bloomington. So I was just really well done. Thanks. It's also interesting you mentioned Riverside Plaza, because that's another class that I teach is geography of the Twin Cities, and we bring all the students up into Riverside Plaza. So meet me after this talk, and I want to talk to you and ask you questions. But yeah, the answer for you, Shoreview, or for any Twin Cities suburb is really simple, which is build more housing, along the transit lines especially. And I know that's not easy to do in a suburb because a lot of the identity... Yeah. What's a transit line? Is that the question? Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, the purple line is they're trying to build something, and White Bear Lake and Maplewood keep saying no to it. So I'm not sure what to do about Shoreview. That's a challenge too. But the housing and the transit have to come together, and so someone's got to start somewhere. But yeah, it's really hard to build housing in suburbs. And this is an age-old story. And is it getting easier? I don't know. Yeah? You say yes. Okay. Well, good, because we need to do a lot more of that.
I moved from South Minneapolis to downtown about 4 years ago. And one of the things I've noticed over the last 4 years is the two parts of downtown that seem to be thriving are downtown east, the Mill District, and the North Loop. So here's a intentionally provocative and hopefully fun question or statement. The best way for us to revive the downtown core would be to eliminate the skyways.
Well, Jeremy, that is what I think. I'm not a popular guy when I say that, and I'm sure you'll be ostracized as well from your community. But I think the skyways are a real problem. And if you asked me the magic wand question, like, Bill, if you had a magic wand, we were working out how this should all go if nobody was interested in asking questions, which won't be a problem. But if you had a magic wand, what would you do to fix downtown Minneapolis? And I was like, that's so easy. I love it. I would just, all the skyways would be gone. And if you just imagine what would happen if you did that, every single little business that's up in there, right, would all of a sudden be on the first floor. That's part of my magic wand, too. And think of how vibrant the streets would be. Think of how many doorways or opportunities there would be to, like, walk around the city and be able to understand it. And the problem with skyways is that when they were designed, downtown was maybe a much more densely populated and trafficked place. And putting all the people in the separate second story seemed like it might work, and it did work in some places and some times because you had such high density. But once you cut that in half or by 2/3, then you have just double the emptiness, you know? So you have a little coffee shop that's open from 10 to 1, and that's up in the Skyway, and you can't really get up there unless you're already up there. And then the restaurant on the first floor is just empty. And so you need a critical mass of people. And as long as you're taking your entire population and cutting it in two and separating them out and segregating them by class and race, which is what another outcome of Skyways are, you just are never going to have a downtown critical mass, and that's a tragedy. I think it's just, and there's not much you can do because the skyscraper is built around a skyway system. You're not going to tear it down. But anyway, you're right that the parts of downtown Minneapolis that are the most comfortable and welcoming and thriving are the ones where the skyways aren't there. I think in St. Paul there's more of an opportunity to maybe start dismantling skyways one by one. You can kind of shrink it down. And that would be good for us to do over there. Well, you improve the sidewalks. Yeah, in winter, you double down on making that great. The best thing about the Skyways is if you are in a wheelchair or scooter, you can get around in there. But if there's nothing there anyway and it feels unsafe, then maybe you don't even want to go down the Skyway tunnel that goes on forever and it's just gray walls and there's like a tumbleweed, you know? So I think that's my answer to that.
Okay. I have a question, but I also just want to make a real quick comment about the Mill District because I lived in Elliott Park for 3 years, and then but I worked in the Mill District. Can we get transit that goes north south on the east side of downtown? Everything gets into downtown on the east side, and then books it for the IDS Center.
Yeah.
Can we go somewhere in downtown on transit besides the IDS Center? Sorry. To my question, I feel strongly about that. If you can't tell. To my question. What about yes and on the Skyways? I feel like, because I mean, this is Minnesota. We do have very cold winters. And I think the most vibrant part of the Skyway that I've seen is the Crystal Palace. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm a suburban. I grew up in the suburbs. I'm not used to being in the city. So it's very intimidating to try and get into the Skyway system because you're walking through some corporate lobby that doesn't want you there to get into the Skyway system. Would it not be potentially more feasible to keep the Skyway system, but try and create more places like the Crystal Palace where you're bringing the Skyway into the street level, where it becomes one connected space so that in the winter you can traverse the system through the Skyway system, but you have that sort of interconnectedness, and so you get kind of the benefits of both rather than just it has to be an either or thing.
Well, Stephen, you might have a great lucrative career as an architecture and planning consultant. Because I'll tell you a funny story. One of the nice things about doing this job for so long, because you said 2014, and I was like, oh God, really? It's been that long, 11 years since I've been doing Cityscape, and that's just a long, it seems like a long time to me. But I've been writing these pieces for so long that now they keep coming back, and I can like look back at stuff I did a long time ago and say, oh yeah. And one piece that I keep returning to was a conversation, a story about the Nicollet Mall reconstruction. So some of you might remember years of no Nicollet Mall, and then it was very expensive, and then after it was done, nobody liked it, okay? And I wrote a piece called, Just Like in the 80s, Nicollet Mall Redo calls for a better access point, or something like that. Because the previous time Nicollet Mall had been a consultant had come in and they hired an architect and wanted to improve it. And they had the same idea that you just had. So in the 80s, they pitched this big public tower that would bring people up and down from the street to the Skyways and back and forth, and it would be easy to access, and everyone would know how to get up in there. It wouldn't be confusing. It would be like a nice public space. And in the 80s, the business owners of the buildings shot it down. And then that happened again when Nicollet Mall was being reconstructed again. James Corner and Associates came in and pitched this big staircase that would connect the Skyway to the street and be a beautiful public space, and the people that own the buildings shot it down.
So what I'm hearing is publicization of the Skyway system taken away from the businesses.
Yeah.
Killing it.
Well, a common critique of the Skyways since they were built was that they're really confusing and only people who work there know how to get around. And that's true. During the Super Bowl, right, they had to bring in volunteers to like stand around in every weird place and like make sure that the Eagles fans knew where to go. And telling Eagles fans to do anything is really hard. So but the point is that the difficulty of navigating the Skyways is a feature and not a bug for a lot of the property owners. At least not all of them, but enough that they kind of continually shot down what you're suggesting.
So it would only get better if the city or state took ownership.
It's a difficult situation because the infrastructure is there, and it's really.
Really interesting. Thank you very much. So, an easy one. Why, when they're rebuilding Hennepin Avenue from Lake Street, do they have to just close everything down? That's miserable, right? But forget about that. I'm really interested in your opinion about how, couple things. They reduced the number of parking stalls that go with these residential buildings a few years ago in an effort to reduce the amount of traffic. And I wonder how that's worked out. And what's your opinion about bike lanes in terms of their usefulness in the city? Thank you.
We knew that was coming, Bill, right?
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
I've been thinking about bike lanes for like, 20 years, and even wrote a dissertation about them, so yeah. that's which one should we tackle? Well, the street reconstructions happen once every 60 to 90 years, and they are digging up everything, all the sewers, and so you have to just close the street, and it sucks. There's no getting around that. Was it parking? How does parking minimums work? Yeah, so mostly it hasn't affected things too much. There's one researcher that is charting parking spaces per building that's been constructed since the city got rid of its parking minimum requirements, and they've been going down a little bit. But for the most part, most developers, with very few exceptions, are still putting parking into a new construction building, at least large ones. Small ones are a little different. It really depends on the neighborhood. I think that's just a wise policy. The example that pops in my head right away is this 1970s apartment tower in Dinky Town called the Chateau. It's a brutalist masterpiece, but it's a building for U of M students, and it's one of the most affordable buildings that's there now, but it has all these parking spots, and the students don't use them, and so they're empty. And forcing people to put parking in when they don't need it is just not a wise thing to do. And so getting away from that is a good idea. Then you asked about bike lanes, and I think my stepmom complains to me about the bike lane on St. Anthony Rondo Avenue in St. Paul, which is really, really wide, and there's never a bicyclist on it. I've seen only one time. I've never biked on it because it's terrifying, okay? The bike lane goes through these like on-ramp intersections, and that bike lane isn't really about bikes at all. That bike lane is just there because they needed to do traffic calming on the street. And they wanted to take away a car lane so that people would stop driving 55 miles an hour in front of people's houses. And so the bike lane is there just because it's cheaper than trying to put a bunch of concrete and stuff in there. That's the case much more than we think. There's a similar situation on Dale Street in St. Paul. I'm giving you St. Paul examples. But they did a 4-3 conversion on Dale Street because it was really dangerous before. And now there's bike lanes that don't get used, but people are driving much more slowly and safely, and it's just a much better outcome. But it's not even really about the bike lane in that case. I think, anyway, I could go on for an hour about that. And I'm going to write more about bike lanes in the next couple months. Is there like one more, Leah? When do we run out of time here?
We have 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Thank
We'll do
goodness.
quick questions.
Really quickly, the hyper local issue that matters the most to me is my alley, especially in the winter. And I've been told the only way to fix it is for Minneapolis to bring back the alley resurfacing program. What is the best way for someone like me, regular, to convince the city to do that?
Give me your email.
I will.
And I'm going to write a column about you, Paula. That sounds perfect. I actually didn't know Minneapolis had alley problems because I just hear about St. Paul's alley problems just like, oh, they go on forever. So it actually is a little comforting to know that Minneapolis hasn't perfected the alley. That's great to hear.
I'm always complaining to my wife, unfortunately, about how I wonder where the planning is. The planning of, if you think that in the city, and we're in Minneapolis, you're in St. Paul, it's pretty close. If we're planning well between the businesses and the city, or where we're falling down. I travel to other cities. You mentioned South Portland, and I'm wondering, where are we missing? Can we be doing better? Are we doing pretty well? I guess I just wonder about the general planning.
This actually is a great way to end. I'll have to talk later, but it started by talking about the election, and we can end by talking just quickly about the election. But one of the problems with the Minneapolis city situation now is that the hostility between part of the city council and the mayor, who is in charge of all the departments, is so great that the hard work of city government, which is often like bottom up, problems pop up, and can you solve them in this cooperative manner and be collegial with each other, and this person that's on the opposite side of you about the stadium, but now you're going to work together to fix the alley. And that's usually how city government operates. And in Minneapolis, for the last few years, it just has been too divisive, and people aren't even solving everyday problems anymore. So I think that's sort of on the ballot as well.
I think you've been. We do have time. I'll do a speed talk for my.
So you were talking about St. Paul and issues. So the mayor has been talking about the balcony on the river, $17 million forever in our climate. Any comment?
Well, downtown St. Paul needs a lot of help, and this river balcony idea is one that I've written about and has been sort of planned for quite a long time. I think it's a good idea. I think what you're skeptical about, Gar, probably is this the right time to spend a lot of public money on something like this? And that's like a good question. Well, I was just in Chicago, and they have this amazing river walk that was created in only 10 years, and it really transformed the Chicago River. People were swimming in it, okay, just last week. I was, really? Yes. So anyway, I think St. Paul's waterfront needs to be improved, and your ideas for that, I'd welcome them. I wrote a whole column about Shepherd Road and why it's terrible, so you can go read that if you want my take on it.
Well, nothing pleases me more than seeing people who love our cities, and I know Bill is such a piece of that, so thank you guys for being here, and let's all join in thanking Bill for being here with us.